In this small town called Elkli, which is quite close to the city of Leeds, lives Yahya Birt. We're going to visit him at home to inquire about what prompted him to make his journey to Islam. His journey to Islam started in 1989. Let's go together. So, Brother Yahya, tell me how and what made you make that journey to Islam?
Assalamu alaikum, first of all, to you and to all the viewers out there. I think I rather stumbled across Islam, if you like. I mean, I don't think I had
accidentally.
I didn't have a plan to seek it out. I rather think that I had qualms about my own life, about the direction I was headed in. And I think that made me open to looking for alternatives. I mean, I'd grown up in a family that had no active religious tradition. I mean, both my parents originally came from Christian backgrounds, but neither of them were believers, really. And we weren't brought up as believers. I mean, I was nominally baptized as a Catholic, but that was to placate my grandfather. But it wasn't because my parents were believers. So we were brought up without religion. We were brought up in a liberal household. Both my parents were part of that sort of 1960s countercultural generation that was rejecting, received political and religious and social authority, and were trying to remake the world. Yeah, and they were protesting, the war in Vietnam and so on. They were part of that sort of counterculture. So I wasn't brought up with religion, and so it didn't strike me as a place that I would look for answers. But what happened was, when I was at university, I became increasingly sort of disenchanted with what I thought was the emptiness of life, lack of higher meaning or higher purpose.
Where did you study?
I was at the University of Manchester at the time, and so I became open to looking for the first time at alternatives, and I looked at Christianity. I went to an Alpha course, which is a sort of induction course to Anglican Christianity run by the Church of England, but I found that I didn't find anything, and logically I couldn't understand how the Trinity would work, so that never really appealed to me logically. But I can't say I had a proper Christian education or background. I was coming to these things for the first time, but it didn't really appeal to me. What was of longer term importance was the fact that I met a good friend, Falahuddin, who had come to Manchester to study metallurgy as a PhD. And I got to know him in my first year away from home.
Where was he from?
He was from Lahore. We became close friends in my first year. He was like an older brother to me.
We're talking here about what time exactly?
This is about 1986 or something like that. So he was like the older brother that I never had, because it was just me and my sister in our family. Took me under his wing, very warm, very hospitable, always was cooking food for me and so on. But he never preached a word of Islam, but he lived it. He embodied it. He was shy and unapologetic about his prayer. He would pray in front of me. And he was always helping people who had need, whoever they were. So he's very, very sort of socially conscious and minded, a good, gentle in speech, a real role model very humble and devout person, but didn't sort of shout it from the rooftops. Rather, I think he wanted to call me and others, because other people took Islam at his hand as well besides me.
So he had his way of opening the door for people.
Well, he called us with his state of being, his presence with God, with how he was as a person. He had a certain spirituality to him that would call you without words, but through actions, through service, through kindness, through his calmness, his contentedness. But it took me about 4 years to figure out that really to ask him about his faith.
From the moment you knew him,
yeah,
until you embraced Islam?
It was about 4 years.
4 years.
The thing is that, you know, I only knew this much later on after I became Muslim, but from the day he first met me, all those years ago, he prayed for me by name after every prayer that I be guided. After every prayer, without fail. He asked God to guide me by name. So this is the kind of person that he was. He's quite an exceptional person.
But he was also ambitious, because according to Islamic tradition, if someone embraced Islam because of you, then you get a great reward. So he was after that reward as well.
Of course, I'll give you one example of what his character was like. Okay, so we lost contact after that first year, and I didn't see him for a couple of years. Okay, and I had left, you know, student accommodation gets booked up. If you leave it late into September, you're desperately trying to find a place to live. Okay, and me and my friend Michael, who another non-Muslim, we had both left it late. We're frantically going around Manchester trying to find a place to stay. Now, my friend Falahuddin, we bumped into him, and remember, this has been a few years since I'd seen him. He said, "Oh, it's been so long, Jonathan, please, let's go have a coffee, let's sit down," you know, and he quickly found out that we were, you know, needing somewhere to stay. Immediately, without hesitation, he said, "Why don't you and Michael come and live with me?" Okay, just like that, at a drop of a hat. And we have 2 spare rooms, it will be ideal. And Michael wasn't very sure at this idea, but I assured him that Falahuddin was a good person and I'd known him, you know, known him well. And what I didn't know at the time was his other flatmate. There was a fourth person, Mr. Khan, who was another friend of his from Pakistan, who was also doing a PhD there. He vehemently objected to our coming to the flat. He said, "Look, Falahuddin, are you mad? We don't know who these people are. They will smoke, they will drink, they'll bring back girls, they'll play music, they'll put bacon in the fridge. It will be a nightmare."
So you bring in these kuffar.
How can you bring these people? They will make our life a misery and they will affect and influence us. And he said, "My dear brother, you always think about how they will influence us. Why don't you think about how we will influence them?"
Yes,
That's what he said. And so then we moved in, and you know, after not having seen him for a couple of years, I was much more, at that point, actively, possibly looking for alternatives, spiritual alternatives. And I could see him every night. He was a hafiz of the Quran. Every night he would recite the Quran for about 40 minutes, 50 minutes. He would always keep his door open so we could hear the melody of the recitation of the Quran coming across the landing. And I just felt I should ask him. So I asked him after about a month or 2, I asked him, I said, "You know, tell me, Falahuddin, tell me about this religion of yours. How is it that you have found all this contentedness and happiness in your life?" Because this is one thing I really saw from him, that he really was at ease with himself, at ease with the world, at ease with people. You know, I said, "How did you find that contentment? You know, what's your secret?" Is what I was asking him, really. And Falahuddin, you know, he went into overdrive at that point, and every night after I said that to him, a new person would come to the house in the evening and talk, some other converts or you know, some old friends of his who were wise and maybe more learned in the ways of Islam. Somebody would come every night and they would talk to me, you know. So I was very accepting at that stage. I didn't really ask for any books. I didn't ask for any deep theological discussions or anything like that. I just thought, I think he's on a right path, and I should just trust in the matter and take a first step. So I really was open. I had doubts and intellectual probably things in my mind, but I thought, let me go with my heart rather than with my head.
Until that moment, you haven't had any acquaintance with someone who, before you embraced Islam?
I mean, did I know other Muslims in my life before that?
Converts?
No, not as such. I mean, we grew up in a multicultural part of South London, so I had plenty of exposure to. I wasn't some white kid in a white suburb who never met anybody. So I knew roughly. I mean, I knew that there were Muslims in the world, and we'd travelled and we'd seen places, but I wouldn't say that I had a great deal of knowledge or anything like that. And so but basically, he took me to the Tablighi Jamaat Markaz in Dewsbury, which was about an hour's drive from Manchester.
He was a Tablighi himself?
I would describe him as a Tablighi, but of independent mind. Okay. He's not one of life's conformists, you know. So a bit of a maverick, I would say, in a good way, yeah. So in any case, he took me there, and I was blown away, because if you've been there, the size of the prayer hall, it was full of people dressed in these white robes, these white imamas, turbans. And I was like, I thought, where am I in England? You know, I was just like really shocked. And they just said, look, just follow them, just pray along. And I said, I don't know what I'm doing, but they just made me pray with them. And afterwards I went to the Imam, who was the head then of the seminary that was attached to Dewsbury. He's now passed away, rahimahullah, but he took my shahada on that night, and that Thursday night, 19th of October 1989. And I felt very much there was a lot of light in that room and a lot of light entering me at that point. This is what I remember, and I remember that feeling.
What was your family's response to this?
Well, with my family, they felt conflicted. So between two things. The first thing was that as liberals, they believe in the value of autonomy and free choice. So in principle, they said, well, you know, you have a right to make your own life choices, you know, and in that regard, we accept your decision, and we won't, you know, we won't sort of challenge you. But at the same time, we have to say that we're unhappy with your decision, and you know, it goes against our secular liberal values. And you know, they were worried about my state of mind. They thought that maybe they definitely felt that Falahuddin was a kind of charismatic person who was maybe unduly influencing me. So they had concerns about that. They saw the Tablighi Jamaat potentially as a kind of cult, you know, which was brainwashing me. Because I then subsequently, over the next sort of 3 years, I was quite heavily involved with the Tablighi Jamaat.
Traveling with them?
Yeah, not for 3 years solidly, but I was actively involved with them when I went home to London, and I spent 40 days going across mosques in the north with them. That was about a month after I converted, and then I spent 4 months in India and Pakistan. In the winter of 1990-91, when the Americans, during the Iraq War, I remember all the elders in the global headquarters of Tablighi Jamaat in Delhi making du'as for the Muslims of Iraq. I remember there was like a special, they all came together and made a big collective du'a.
Now you've just said that your friend Falahuddin seemed like a role model to you.
Yeah.
Now, you must have seen other Muslims who were not that exemplary in their conduct, probably. That didn't affect your decision in any way?
Look, I think we're all taught to ignore the headlines, you know, in the sense that we all know that there's a difference between screaming headlines and there's a difference between our daily life and experience, and we get to know people personally. I think most people have that common sense of being able to trust their everyday interactions with people. So, you know, there could be screaming headlines about terrorism or fatwas or whatever it was, but I was concentrating my experiences of getting to know people at my local mosque, getting to know the musallis there, many of them being extremely kind to me, particularly in those early years, and helping me. I remember the sort of bonds of brotherhood that I developed were really strong, and some of the most strongest friendships I've had within the House of Islam, because really they were helping me through those first years where you're trying to just find your feet, understand the basic practices of the religion, understand the cultural dynamics of the community that you're part of, you know, because obviously every manifestation of Islam comes within a particular cultural context, with a particular historical background. And because the House of Islam is vast, it's a mansion. The foundation is Tawheed, yeah, and the example of the Prophet, but within that house, historically, has developed many rooms decorated in slightly different styles. So you wander through that mansion, it's a lot to take in the diversity of that. So it took me a long time to develop a sensibility of understanding the difference between the kind of the essence of Islam, if you like, and its manifestation in culture and history. You know, so I'm not of that persuasion that I believe that culture and history are wrong. What I think that when we say Islam is universal, we mean that it can come to all peoples. So in other words, it could find a cultural, historical expression with all of those peoples, because the Prophet is a universal messenger. He wasn't just sent to the Arabs, he was sent to everybody. So if Islam's going to have cultural expression, it will have different forms of cultural expression. And I have to believe that, because I believe that one day there will be a mature English cultural expression of Islam. And I'm part of that long, slow process of finding how the essence of Islam can live, breathe and flourish in an English cultural idiom. So I have to believe that that's possible, because if I had to believe that I could only be authentically Muslim if I became a proper Arab Muslim or a proper Pakistani Muslim or a proper Malaysian Muslim, then only then would I be a proper Muslim. This is the kind of ordinary Muslims, you know, who, for them, when they learn Islam, they learn it in a cultural package, and religion and culture are meshed together very nicely and seamlessly, and it's given to them as an entire gift to them, and they inculcate it as children and as young adults. And so when they see, sometimes I've seen converts, they give that same package to them, not out of hate, but out of love. You know, we have to recognize that it's a problem of love, because they're giving you the best of what they had. But unfortunately, that gift is not for you. We have to create that package now for ourselves, and it's a long, slow process. It doesn't happen overnight.
Now, from what you've just said, it seems that in your case, the Muslim community was accommodating and helpful.
Well, this is the first 3 years. I think when I was involved with Tabligh, it changed a lot when I went back to university and I went to SOAS.
What happened then?
Well, this was the early 90s, so I was a very active part of the Islamic Society at SOAS. And as you may remember, in the early 90s, in student activism, Muslim student activism in England, it was a ferment, you know, it was a torrent, because a lot of new ideas were coming through to that second generation of Muslims who were coming into university. They'd be exposed to new movements that had come from different parts of the Muslim world. And so there was a very strong debate going on about politics, about creed, about Aqidah, and it was very intense, and it was very, as all young people, very disputatious, and we all were convinced that it was life and death, you know, when it wasn't. It was just our immaturity at the time. But I come from a very sheltered Tablighi Jamaat kind of environment for the first 3 years. I was shocked to be. They avoid controversy at all costs. You know, they don't talk about fiqh even, let alone politics.
Yes.
Okay, but I was thrown into the middle of this, so that was another whole thing that I had to try. I had to try and contend with all of that, and we had divisions in our ISOC and a lot of disputation between different factions. And, you know, while I had a lot of help and support there in my role, also other people were accused, inevitably converts get accused of being spies and stooges and this kind of thing. And these things do get thrown around. And at the time, I found that so hurtful that I withdrew from the Islamic Society activism altogether, and it affected my level of practice as well, because I felt, why are my Muslims accusing me of being a hypocrite and a spy?
They suspected you.
They suspected me of being some kind of agent. And the thing is that we it was a difficult situation. Just in brief, I won't go into it for too long, but in brief, we had a lot of tensions amongst Jewish and Muslim students on our campus. And some unfortunate things were being said by some of the more hot-blooded young Muslims. And we were just trying to mediate that situation, not to deny Palestinian, pro-Palestinian activism on campus, but to calm down some of the rhetoric. And that was taken the wrong way by some people. With my more mature hat on, I understand why these accusations occur. It comes out of a long colonial history and anti-colonial struggle. But at the time, when I was younger back then, I didn't have that understanding and patience with. I let this accusation affect me when it shouldn't have done. It was part of my immaturity and part of my own trying to grow it to become a better Muslim.
But it's a real contrast between a situation where the Muslim community is jubilant about someone coming to Islam and a Muslim student community that is so suspicious and probably fearful of this person who doesn't seem to be fitting or part of the community.
Well, I should say it wasn't all of the Muslim students. It was, as I said, it was factionalized. So it was only a few who were saying this, but I was being hounded for weeks by them, and it was very unpleasant. I just had to get out of that situation because it was just too intense. If I'd been more mature in my response, I would have realized that it was just part of a political strategy that they had.
So you withdrew from activism for a while?
Activism and some level of practice as well for some time. And I didn't really, I think that round about the mid-90s, I always kept interested and involved at some level with different groups in London. But I think what the difference was probably meeting my wife in '97 and getting married, and and starting a Muslim family together. Had our first son in 2001.
Was she born a Muslim or was she
a
convert?
No, my wife was originally born in India, but grew up in the UK from a young age, and is an intellectual academic in her own right. And she comes from a noble family that has served the cause of Islam in India for generations, as imams, as muftis, as people who've built religious institutions of importance and spread the deen amongst the people, and combated ignorance and spread knowledge and so on. So that she comes from a noble lineage. Her father was an imam here in the UK in the 1970s.
Now I understand that it took you a while to come out publicly as a Muslim, and that's because of family considerations.
Yeah, that's right. Well, as a younger generation won't be aware of this, my father is well known, so he has been a public figure. So he was Director General of the BBC in the 1990s, retiring in 2000. He was a controversial figure at the time because he was bringing certain reforms at the BBC that were internally unpopular, and that led to a lot of negative press coverage. And we had paparazzi, outside the gates of the house. So
they were looking for a story somewhere.
They're looking for a story, and having growing up, converted to Islam in '89, in the middle of all of this press attention to my father, I took the decision that I wouldn't piggyback on my father's fame in order to promote the deen. And a lot of Muslim organizations, community organizations, individuals approached me over that whole decade of the 90s saying, come and do this, do that talk, do this, do that, with that very aim in mind. But I took the decision that actually my family would look down on me and judge me negatively for doing that, for using my father's name and fame for that purpose. They would receive that negatively. So I took the decision that I shouldn't have a more public profile or do any writing or speaking until I judged that situation had changed. And I felt that that did change in 2000 when my father retired or stood down from the BBC.
Is it likely that there are such Muslim individuals who, because of similar considerations, do not come out in public as Muslims? People who convert to Islam but keep it to themselves?
Well, amongst the converts who are publicly known, who've come out publicly as converts, we do talk about this on occasion. We do speculate. We speculate about some people. We're not sure whether they have converted or not.
You suspect?
We suspect, but they're, you know, they're Islamophiles. They're very friendly towards Muslims and Islam. They support Muslims and they stick their necks out for them. And you sometimes wonder. And then I know of at least one case, one prominent individual who's got a high position who has converted, but you know, I'm under obligation to maintain their anonymity.
And we'll keep
yeah,
it.
But what I mean is that some people make the judgment that for whatever reason they don't want to, and then you have people know that they're Muslim, but they sort of downplay it, and they don't make a public stand, or they don't do dawah programs like this, or they don't write on controversial issues, political issues affecting the Muslim community and stick their necks out. They don't they're not activists, I can put it that way. They're just Muslims people know they're Muslims, but they're just quietly living their life and bringing up their families, you know, as good Muslims, etc. You know, just trying to be good Muslims. But so I don't know. I couldn't give you a figure. I couldn't give you you know, an analysis.
We just keep speculating.
yeah.
Well, Brother Yahya, thank you very much. It's been really a pleasure.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for having me. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.